There is a new breed of influencer and people out there in the financial space who are telling you that financial advisors are not what you need. And so you better make sure that you can tell people how you add value. And then you also need to make sure you're doing the things that you're telling people.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Connected Advisor. I'm your host, Kyle Van Pelt, CEO and co-founder of Milemarker. And today we've got a special one. I am joined by Brian Preston. A lot of you probably know Brian from the Money Guys podcast and in just one of the fastest growing RIAs in the state of Tennessee. So Brian, who's not only running an incredible RIA and host of the Money Guys show, but he has laid out this incredible 9-step system for building wealth with the money you already have. You guys remember PEMDAS from grade school? It was an acronym that broke down complex math problems into simple steps. Well, when it comes to managing your money, Brian and his team have put together what's called the financial order of operations. Helps you demystify your dollars and show you a way to build transformative wealth with the tools that you already have available to you. He's written an incredible book that we're going to talk a little bit about here today. And I'm so excited to have you on the show. Brian, thanks for carving out time to come and chat on The Connected Advisor.
Hey, Kyle, thanks so much. I love, talking to fellow advisors and then offering any insight that I can in this crazy, wonderful world of finance that we all work in.
I'm so glad to hear you say that. Just before we kind of came on air here, we were talking about your life before you were an advisor, which was, you worked in government in my home state of Georgia, right?
Yeah, I did a few things. I started, I worked in public accounting, and then I worked at a very large fee-only financial planning firm in Atlanta, where we worked with a lot of, Home Depot execs, athletes. And then I started my own firm in 2002. And then if I didn't think that running my own firm was enough, I did dabble with, I was chairman of a school board, and then I even served as a county commissioner for a few years.
Man, yeah, that's a totally different life. So my first question I love to ask my guests is, what was your money moment? What was that moment that caused you to get into this profession? Because most people don't grow up thinking, hey, I'm going to be a financial planner or I'm going to go work in the financial services space. You've done a couple of different things, but what was your money moment, Brian, that brought you to this industry?
Yeah, actually, if you'd asked me, I always knew I had a fascination with money. I was I call it a financial mutant. I was even in high school. I didn't grow up with money. I grew up in a household with more love than money, but it was one of those things where I was always good with money. I always had the coupons, always had the wallet with a few bucks in it. And when I went to college, I was originally a finance major because I knew I wanted to learn more of how money worked, because even though my parents didn't have money, they were very thrifty, but they just knew nothing about investing. Their idea of investing was buying CDs. So when I went to college, I wanted to figure out how money worked. I was originally finance, but then I got scared. It seemed like all the finance majors went into sales positions, and not coming from money, I didn't feel like I was going to be that successful selling anything. So I went the easier road, which was, or the easier road to get a job and not have to sell, was public accounting. Did that for a few years. And then fortunately in the mid 90s, or you could say unfortunately, a lot of CPA firms got into doing consulting, wealth management, and other things. This is what, turned out to be a disaster with Enron and Arthur Andersen and all that stuff, but it was great for accounting firms that were getting into financial planning. I was able to ask my managing partners if I could kind of transition from working audit to doing financial planning and tax. They took a chance on me, and then that's kind of how I got into it, which I've loved, kind of working in finance, knowing how money works. I will tell you, it was very humbling when I did go out on my own in 2002, because it took me a long time to build assets. I was not a fast grower in those early years. Now it looks so easy because we have all the social media and we have inbound marketing. But at the time, I was a horrible marketer when I first started and went out on my own.
I want to come back to that for sure to talk a little bit about that because I think this audience could definitely learn from that. But you said in college is kind of where you studied finance and got your interest for this. I think that's incredible. But I also have to ask you a question about college. So you went to UGA in Athens, Georgia. But as I understand it, your father went to the University of Florida and played football there. So I really just want to know, did your father disown you when you went to UGA instead of going to UF, or was there real problems in the household that needed to be solved between you and your dad?
Yeah, no, I mean, it is interesting. My dad was Spurrier's blindside tackle. If you ever watched the Gatorade commercials or anything with Steve Spurrier, if you look on the outside left, there's my dad, number 71. But there's an amazing thing. As I said, we had more love than money in our household. And there's a thing called in-state tuition and then the Hope Scholarship that came around also. Because I was a good high school student. And my dad, because, as a parent, once you start having to pay for college or thinking about college, look, he's still rooted for the Gators when they played the Dogs. But there's nothing like that in-state tuition and that Hope Scholarship to kind of push those alliances to go in a different direction.
Yeah, great answer, man. I had to bring that up as a UGA fan myself. I knew that there had to be some sort of rub there. What a cool story about your dad, though. That's a lot of fun.
By the way, I'm a dog through and through. I have tons of memorabilia in my office, but I don't hate the Gators or even Spurrier like a lot of my other dogs do because I just knew him as a person through my father, and he's not as bad as we all make him out to be, but he doesn't like dogs.
Yeah. I love it, man. Well, quickly, I want to ask you one more thing just about being an advisor, and then we'll jump into this incredible book that you wrote. So you did bring up marketing, you brought up social media and all of that stuff. I mean, obviously your podcast and your show is incredible. You were kind of, I would say, early to YouTube, especially, right? That's maybe a big difference.
Really, podcasting. I mean, if you look, I started podcasting 2006. I don't even know if most people even knew what a podcast was in 2006.
No, not in 2006.
And then got into YouTube in 2017, and that was kind of an accident. And the fact that I was hired by Progressive Commercial to do a 12-part podcast series for over-the-road truckers. And then they asked for 2 of those episodes to be videos. And so we had to scramble, find a cameraman, and then voila, YouTube was born out of that project. So it was kind of amazing.
That's amazing. So I think my question is, is that just consistency over time? Or do you think there's kind of could any advisor go and start a podcast and a YouTube channel? And if they just keep showing up day over day, could they have the level of growth and success you all are having? Or do you think there's some secret sauce that goes into a little bit too?
Well, I definitely think that there's a lot of value to content creation, especially if you have a passion and you have that educator's heart. I do think that you've got to be committed. I think we have inspired so many podcasts because I think they look at us and they go, man, if those yokels can do it and be successful, then anybody can do it. So we've inspired a lot of podcasts. But I think what hurts a lot of people, though, is they don't recognize how difficult it is, not in the first 2 months or maybe even the first 3 months. It's really that month 6, month 7th, month 8, if you're not getting traction and you're still having to create content and you're in this void, it can get kind of lonely and it hurts the ego a little bit. So I think that a lot of people aren't crazy enough to keep pushing through those dark periods.
Yeah, well said, man. Well said. So for the advisors listening to this, if you want to get into content creation, I do think commitment is as much as anything. Just like you commit to your clients, you've got to commit to those future clients by serving them with the content and the education through a platform like a podcast or YouTube.
Well, find what you attribute victories or successes from. For me, it was getting those initial emails from people who were listening, maybe the 30 people, 50 people who've started off and saying, hey, you're really giving me good advice and I appreciate it. And that was enough, the affirmation, to power me through those moments where there just weren't that many people out there. And then, look, I don't want to take away from the team I have working with me, as well as I have a co-host with Bo, who's brilliant. I think that we all just kind of gel together, and you never know when you have that lightning in a bottle opportunity where it just works. So I think we have created something pretty special, but that doesn't mean that there's not room for other people to also get into the content creation.
Yeah, very cool, man. Very cool. All right, let's get into the book. So you've written this really cool book called The Millionaire Mission. And I love the concept of it. I love what you've put together. But the whole idea is it's a 9-step system to level up your finances and build wealth for investors out there.
Yeah.
What inspired you to write this? So you're going along, you're building a practice, you're doing this, and all of a sudden you make the decision you're going to write a book, which I have several friends who've written lots of them. And it's not the easiest thing in the world, even if you know what you want to write about. So what sends you down this path?
Well, I've always had the bucket list goal of writing a book, but I got to tell you, I've had probably 4 or 5 false starts where, you start writing an outline and then it just doesn't happen. And this one probably would have ended up just like all the other failed attempts. And this is where I always say finding the silver lining in situations is that the chaos of COVID, when we went through the pandemic, it was just a weird time. I was at the house because we'd sent a lot of the folks home for those first few weeks after the pandemic started. You got a lot of time with the family, and I'm always trying to figure out in chaos, is there an opportunity? And for me at this one, I was like, man, this is probably a good time while I have my mindset to focus on putting this time to be productive. And I actually started writing Millionaire Mission, and it actually stuck. I was actually able to get the first draft fully written because I got very systematic with my writing during that following 5-6 month process. But I should tell you, it's just like everything. You come up with a dream and you think it's going to be so simple, but the book that you're actually reading is probably about the 3rd or 4th version of that book, is because editors, rip and grip and shred things. And then I've gone back and read it because just when people tell you, hey, you need to give us the final copy on stuff, it's amazing the intensity that comes when something's due. And I rewrote complete sections when I felt like they weren't good enough. But it was a great process. I think the team would kill me if I said we were writing another book right after this next year, but it's I think it's still a good process, and it was a fun process, and I think folks are going to love it. I mean, I think about the books that inspired me, the Millionaire Next Door, I have a copy over here signed by Dr. Stanley. And then I think about Wealthy Barber. Those books just fired me up in the mid-90s back when I first came out of college. I'm hoping this book will be that catalyst for the next generation of people, as well as people who are good with money, just looking for some type of confirmation of the decisions they're making.
I love that, man. And I hope that you're right. I also read The Millionaire Next Door. I think everybody has, but it was a big one for me as well. And that's a cool mission. You didn't just do this to put another book out there into the world. There's some passion behind it, and you have a lot of hope for what it can become. So let's talk about it a little bit. So, I noticed the connection between kind of using a school-based formula. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. With a financial order of operations, you were also on the county school board. So it seems like education really matters to you. But talk to us about what the financial order of operations is. There's 9 steps.
Yeah.
Maybe list them out for us and talk to us about why those are important.
Well, I mean, this whole thing came from one of my favorite shows that we were doing for years was the 30-minute financial plan. As I was like, man, people who come to me don't know anything about money. What would I want them to do in 30 minutes to get their life on track? And then I remember there was a LinkedIn post where everybody was failing. And I was like, holy cow, these people don't understand that. Somebody had posted a post on LinkedIn with all these shapes, and then they had exponents and they had, parentheses, and nobody was getting the right answers when turning it into a math formula. And I was like, these people obviously have no idea about the order of operations with math. It's like fireworks went off, and it's like, holy cow, this is the opportunity, financial order of operations, because money works the exact same way as math. There is a better way to do it. And I kind of married the 30-minute financial plan on what are the things you ought to do first, and then went right off to the races, because there's and by the way, I'm not the first one to come up with a step system. It's just that I always saw, and maybe working in this profession, I saw the faults in it. And I was like, there is a better way to do this. And that's kind of what I set out on a path. And then we do a Q&A show every week with a live stream. And I'm happy to report after years after developing this thing holds up. I mean, it doesn't matter what situation, this thing is road tested or battle tested. But I'll walk you through the steps. First, step one, highest deductible covered. There's other systems out there that say $1,000. What's $1,000 going to do for you these days? I think you got to cover that highest insurance deductible because that's really what you're trying to protect yourself from. Number two is the employer match, free money. Well, who can beat a guaranteed 50% to 100% rate of return? No one. So get that money. And then, of course, number three, high interest debt. With interest rates being over 25, 30% on credit cards, you got to pay those off because that's just ridiculous. Then we come to number four, emergency reserves, 3 to 6 months cash reserves, unless you're close to retirement, then go even higher. And then number five, tax-free growth opportunities with Roth IRAs, HSAs. Number six, max out those retirement accounts. This is where you're pushing to either get to the maximum annual contributions or at least 25% of your gross income. And then hyperaccumulation. This is where, hey, now let's start thinking about the three buckets, whether it's after tax, whether it's tax deferred, whether it's tax-free Roth accounts. How are you actually going to use that money in retirement? Let's start thinking about that. Begin with the end in mind. And then step 8, prepaid future expenses, or what we like to call abundance goals. And then step 9, let's pay off those low interest debts, the mortgages primarily. And that typically happens when you're post 45. So that's the 9 steps. And then, of course, we always say ground rules, generosity is step 0. So make sure you're generous even with your time if you don't have money.
I love that ground rule. It's the whole thing of, if you're faithful with the little things, you'll be faithful with the big things, right? You can't wait until you've got a bunch of money to start being generous because, you're either a generous person or you aren't. And learning how to be generous with a dime from a dollar or 25 cents from a dollar will mean that you're generous with much larger sums of money later on. I'm a huge believer and fan of that ground rule and ground zero thing.
Well, it's also important to know happiness with a little too, because I think if you can figure out how you can be happy with limited resources, it really will fine tune what you put value and stock in. Happiness, is really the understanding of, and fulfillment lives where if have money plus purpose, it's those intersections that really create something special.
Oh, yeah, that's cool. And, when you bring that up, that makes me think just about mindset. So you built these financial order of operations, but it's like, I don't know, you think of the phrase, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink kind of thing. What do you think are the mindsets required to build wealth, to be able to execute these financial order operations and actually be successful with money in your life?
Well, we always, I've done content where I talk about the 3 key ingredients to wealth creation. And really the first ingredient is discipline. If you don't understand deferred gratification and overcoming the human's desire for instant gratification, you'll never get ahead. You see, the first thing you got to master is that mindset of discipline. And then hopefully, if you can develop that habit of living on less than you make and creating that margin, that leads to having money. And money's that second component, because if you can put that money to work, let your army of dollar bills start working for you, you can lead to step 3, or the third ingredient, which is actually the most valuable. If you have enough time and you do this early enough and put that money to work, you will create success, abundance, and wealth over the long term.
Oh, man, that's really cool. So you've mentioned the 9 steps, which I think are awesome, but you are also, this isn't just theory, you're actually doing this with clients on a regular basis at Abound Wealth Management. Yep. So just out of curiosity, which of those 9 steps is maybe the most fulfilling, I guess is the word I would use, or one that brings you the most gratification to see your clients complete?
My favorite one is the step 7. If you're just holding it back up. And by the way, anybody can go download this at moneyguy.com/resources. But hyperaccumulation, because that's that 3 bucket strategy. That's where your tax-free accounts, your after-tax, or taxable accounts, and then your tax-deferred. I love the jigsaw puzzle of people who come to you with chaos of they don't know how to structure their accounts. They don't know how to think about things in tax-efficient ways. They don't know how they're going to get access early when they're retiring. That step lets you answer so many of those things. It kind of is where the desire intersects with the whole implementation or the use. And so you feel like you're adding a lot of value when you're dealing with clients in that section. There's a lot of pushback at that one too, because people, they get confused or they don't know how to kind of ask you the right questions on that. So it can be a little hard for the client, but that's why I think us financial advisors, we can add a lot of value because we can hold their hand. We can help them actually execute the plan. and really walk them through into the transition into abundance.
Very awesome. Well, okay. We've talked a little bit about the book. I love that this is a bucket list item for you. Walk us through a little bit of the differences of your process, as you mentioned earlier in the interview, of writing the book, but you create so much digital content too. What was the difference, right? What's the contrast between creating the digital content you do and creating this artifact, this book, this thing that you poured your heart and soul into over all that time?
No, it's a pretty big difference. It seems easy to create a 35-minute show because I just need to come up with an outline of 3 to 5 key points that I'm trying to teach or guide someone on. A book is a completely different adventure because you have to essentially start with a begin, start with a middle, and then an end, and you have to have a string that hopefully intersects and connects the whole concept. It's tough. And then, what I found is that when I was reading my book after I wrote the first draft, I thought, I was like, man, I loved how the first 2 to 3 chapters worked out. I love how the last chapter kind of set up. I was like, man, but this section here just felt like it fell asleep a little bit. And I want a book that it's like kicking the whole time. So it's just that's not the easiest task. Whereas I think, when you're doing something for 35 minutes, you can put a lot of razzle dazzle in 35 minutes. Whereas a book that's, hundreds of pages long, it takes a lot more effort, a lot of work to keep the energy high and also try to keep the value proposition strong for the reader. It's not easy to sell a book these days. So I tried to overwhelm the reader with tremendous value, entertainment, and other things because I know how much goes into just a person buying a book and then taking the time to invest to read something. Because I've bought books before, and you read a chapter or two and you go, oh, you can tell they were really excited at the beginning, but they fell off at the end. I've tried to overcome that as I was writing Millionaire Mission.
Yeah, I think anybody listening to this who would say that they haven't bought a book and either never started it or, started it and didn't finish it, they'd be lying if they said that. I think everybody's experienced that. So I love that mission. It's like, hey, how do I create something that makes people really want to read it from start to finish and it's easy to consume? That's really cool.
This podcast is brought to you by Turncast. We make game-changing content for fintech and financial services companies. Learn more at turncast.com.
What else about the book? Because I want to transition and talk a little bit more about, you building and growing a firm as well. But anything else on the book that I haven't asked you about that I should have?
No, I mean, the big thing is that I hope, because I know that this is primarily an advisor community, but I would still hope that your audience would consider checking it out. Because, I mean, this does have a lot of my story built into it. So I think probably a kindred spirit to a lot of other financial advisors you might even find. Because, Kyle, you and I, even before we hit the record button, I think all of us financial mutants have a lot of intersections in our lives. And I think you're going to see a lot of yourself in my own financial journey. And that's probably going to make you a better advisor with your clients too, is because if you can connect your own life experiences with even some of the stuff that happened to me and go, yeah, I completely connect with that, it's going to make you a better advisor. And it's also, I think one of the things that made me such a good tax accountant when I was doing tax preparation for all those 16 years was kind of knowing the why the government set this tax law up or how that actually flows through. If there's anything you struggle with communication with clients, I think you're going to probably find some pretty good down-to-earth communication things on how I shared it in Millionaire Mission.
That's well said. And I actually could not agree more that for all the advisors listening to this, you should pick it up because this business is a communication business. At the end of the day, it is about transfer of trust and it is about communication. Most of you know, listening to this, my early career was at Riskalyze. And one of the most profound things about that was taking something that was difficult to understand, like what is a moderately aggressive investor, and boiling it down to a number where you create common language. The 9 steps here, the financial order of operations, is a great framework to have discussions with investors about, because listen, the reality is they're all afraid if they're coming and talking to you. They're worried about am I doing well enough? Am I going to be okay? They've got a lot of fear and anxiety on their minds. And so the simpler that you can communicate and the easier that you can communicate, the better. And so I totally echo that sentiment. I think everybody should read this and perhaps even buy a copy for your clients.
Yeah. I just want to inspire people to really be curious about finance, because it made me so sad to have parents that were so good at the hard part of money, which is being disciplined and saving and creating that margin, but never understanding how you actually execute, letting your army of dollars work harder than you can with your back, your brain, your hands. And I think there's a lot of Americans that struggle with that. I mean, when the fact that close to 60% of Americans can't even come up with $1,000, there's plenty of work for all of us advisors to do out there.
100%. All right, let's pivot and start talking a little bit about, you running and building an advisory firm. So you talked at the beginning that with all the media and stuff, there's a lot of inbound leads. There's a lot of growth, right? Yep. You were one of the top 1 or 2 fastest growing firms in Nashville. Incredible accolades. I think my question is, okay, everybody looks at that and the lights and they go, man, that's so cool. They're growing so fast. But what challenges come from all of that inbound, from the content and the podcast and all of that? Are you struggling to keep up with all of the growth, or what have you guys had to do to reinvent yourselves a couple of times to take all of this on?
Well, look, there's no complaints. I'll tell you that, because I've been through the 3 years it took to get to 10 million in assets under management. So I know how it is to live in scarcity where nobody's calling you. So it feels a little off to complain about the complications of a fast growing firm, but it's people. I mean, it's systems. When young advisors come to me, I always say, you just need to make sure you're always thinking 3 to 5 years in the future, because some of the best advice I got was actually when I was in public accounting. I had a managing partner who found out that I was helping out friends and family with their taxes. And he asked me, he says, what are you charging on that? And I was like, $50. He's like, son, you can't do that. If you can't put value to what you're doing, nobody will ever value what the value of what you're putting in with what your every hour of your time is worth. Because I think a lot of this new breed of advisors, it's because there's so much pressure on AUM advisors. There's all these content creators that are telling everybody, don't hire a financial advisor. There's a lot of advisor hate out there right now. But you just need to be very confident in what value and what service you offer your clients. And part of as you're growing a firm is to know how you're going to scale or grow and take advantage of all the software, all the things that are going to make you the best version. You mentioned Riskalyze. I mean, we use Riskalyze in our practice. And I think that that's just one element that you're going to need. If you're going to do it right, you have to invest in a good portfolio management. You have to have a good custodian behind you. You have to have good people that you're working with. All those systems. CRMs, 'cause I think a lot of us fall into the trap of going with the cheapest versus the scalable function because it's a few bucks more. Just don't make those mistakes. Be thinking about where you want to be 3 to 5 years. Because I fell in some traps when I was building my first firm, because I was always thinking about how I cut the corner off on the cost. In my defense, money was tight in some of those years, because I told you how horrible of a marketer I was. But I think if you can still have that long-term mindset to be thinking where you want to be and build a system for that. I remember when our portfolio management, we weren't at 100 million in assets when we took down the system that we use. And everybody's like, you don't need to use that system unless you have, over 100 million or a few hundred million, because it's too expensive. I was like, well, that's where we're going. Because, one of the worst things you can do as a growing firm is to do an apple cart turnover on all your technology, because it's already hard enough to make sure your clients are happy, to make sure your team is happy. Just make sure you have that long-term mindset and invest for your future, even if it costs you a few extra bucks.
Amen. I love that answer. That's really well stated. So let's talk a little bit about technology. What do you think are some of the big challenges that you experience with technology? Is it, you kind of just hit on one that I hear when we speak to firms is, hey, there might be some new cool stuff that I really want to go adopt, but it's such a pain to maybe change from one system to another or whatever. So a lot of people feel like, hey, we've got what we got. We're going to make the most of it. I'm not really going to be exploring new things. Or, do you think of other challenges when it comes to tech?
Well, I mean, tech is it's a dangerous edge in some ways. Like I'll tell you a quick story. There was a company named TechFi that was a portfolio management software that came on the scene, and it was dirt cheap and it was open access. It was like $2 or $3 grand a year. I jumped on it because it was cheap. It was good technology. It was so good that one of the bigger providers of portfolio management just bought them to kill them. I think they bought them for like $25 million. It was Advent that bought them out and just completely destroyed it. And that left me scrambling. So I think with technology, here's what I would give advice if I was talking to other advisors is definitely make sure you're on the front edge of understanding what options are out there and available for you, but don't be an early adopter. You kind of need to make sure that you have a viable company that you're actually going into. And then even when you're in the trying out or talking to the marketing team, ask them what the plan is for the business. That's one of the things I have, since I learned from Tech 5, never fallen in the trap again. I've always trying to go with kind of the best and most accepted paths instead of having to redo the whole process. It was the same way when I did taxes as well, by the way. There were some upstarts on the tax prep software that I jumped on one time to save a few bucks. Anytime I've made a decision to save a few bucks, I've usually kicked myself 5 times over for the short-sightedness. I want you to save your money, but I also want you to be very prudent with your decisions on how you invest in that latest technology. It's one of those things where if you do it right, it will make your job so much easier as you do get bigger and can scale and grow into the firm you want to be.
Very cool. All right. I don't think we could talk about tech without talking about the future. Tech and future tend to go hand in hand. So one of the things I love to ask a lot of the guests, and I think you're sitting in a unique seat, is to get out your crystal ball. You said, hey, I want to be thinking about my firm, 3 to 5 years in the future and building things today that, the firm 5 years from now is going to appreciate. So right now, as you're sitting there, what are you seeing 5 years from now? If you're thinking about your firm, like what kind of stuff do you see coming down the pike for the future of our industry and for the future of your firm?
Well, I think there's already so much that has happened in the fact that it used to be financial planning was a neighborhood game. You would work with people in your geographic area, but now, especially post-pandemic, I don't think people care where you live anymore. So technology has already removed any geographic barriers. And then, it goes back to, you hear all this talk about artificial intelligence, the robos, all the stuff that is supposedly going to take us all out. I don't actually think they will take us out. I think at the end of the day, success breeds and creates complexity, and people, even when they have resources, they want another human that is going to be there and help them, guide them through the journey. But with that said, you still need to understand there is a new breed of influencer and people out there in the financial space who are telling you that financial advisors are not what you need. And so you better make sure that you can tell people how you add value. And then you also need to make sure you're doing the things that you're telling people, because it is and I say anybody who looks at our firm, if you understood how complex success is, you would never think that you're not going to need a financial advisor. When you start thinking about Social Security, Medicare, Roth conversion strategies, tax location, all those things that happen, you guys know, you work in the field, so you get it, but know what you do. So walk the talk and then make sure that you share with clients so they also become kind of your advocates. But then I will tell you, I think you also have to be prepared to kind of create a brand that focuses on educating the client so that they're a better consumer, because that's where the entire world is going. I think that traditional media is struggling because more and more social media, meaning like YouTube and other influence people, are getting more prominence than even sometimes traditional media has. So you need to figure out, where does your voice kind of fit into that? Because there is a unique opportunity that if you're good at it and you're a good communicator and you have a passion for making sure your clients get an education, I think this is the greatest time to get into this field. I mean, there's a reason I tell anytime I meet a young person, I try to tell them about the wonderful world of personal finance. I mean, because I think this is the greatest profession. You can make a great living for your family, for your employees, but you also go to sleep at night knowing you added a lot of value to everybody you helped. There's very few things in life that I think that are win-wins all the way around. So I love what we get to do for a living.
Man, that's awesome. So, okay, you brought something up, and I have to ask you about it because I think it's very real. So, I'm not trying to ruffle any feathers, but I think there's so many advisors who get roadblocked by compliance for putting out certain types of content or all of these things. You got to go through these, compliance reviews, all of that. But yet, if I want to, I could go start a TikTok account right now and I could start telling people to buy these crazy life insurance policies or giving all kinds of wild and wacky financial advice on TikTok without any regulation. So I'd just love to hear you riff on that a little bit of how can maybe things evolve in our industry from a regulatory perspective so that people who are trying to provide quality education like yourself, or I've had a couple of other guests on who are passionate about that, maybe don't have as much handcuffs or shackles on as somebody who just goes and starts talking about financial, personal finance on TikTok.
Well, I think if you're going to do it right, you do need to be scared about compliance. I mean, that's what we have, a culture of compliance. I mean, it's not just a mantra. We really do. And that's why you have to invest in making sure that you're, archiving all the things you create. It's a pretty hefty thing that we have to invest in to make sure that we're compliant. And also, believe me, we have a lot of discussions. I think Bo and I do it naturally because we've been doing it so long now. You notice we never make specific recommendations. We always, when we talk about investing, even in index funds, we say, go do your research at some of the biggest providers, low cost providers, but we don't ever point in on one specific fund or one specific provider that we recommend, because that would be inappropriate and the SEC doesn't like that type of stuff. So we're very aware of how we use our language and our communication to try to be very compliant, appropriate. But it is one of those things where I think all the bad voices out there, it's kind of no different than when I was doing taxes. I always used to say, look, anything's deductible until you get caught. I mean, you can file a tax return and the government will even send you a check for a bogus transaction, but that doesn't mean that it was truly a deductible or good expense. And I think the same thing's going on right now in finance with social media, is that there are a lot of bad voices out there that are misleading people, and there's just the government can't catch up with the technology yet and do it in a meaningful way. But that doesn't mean that we should back away from it. It means that just good voices should educate. And I have found when we've actually had correspondence and discussions with, when we've had exams with the SEC or inquiries from the SEC, when they find out what you're doing and you're actually trying to educate the consumer base, they're actually very pleased with that. I don't want to, put myself on any shaky water with that, because we're very respectful of the government and all the other stuff. But I will tell you, I think that they like education because the world needs more of that.
I love that. Great answer. I respect that you highlighted, hey, compliance isn't the enemy. It's actually a good thing because it is protecting people, and you can build and create great content while still being within compliance. And I think that's awesome. So appreciate you sharing. All right. We're going to transition into the final segment of the show. We call it the Milemarker Minute. So it's a lightning round series of questions. The goal is to try and have all of the questions answered in less than a minute. So they're pretty punchy questions. I'm not going to hold you directly to a minute, but I think we can make it happen. What do you think?
Let's do it. Even though I'll tell you, I have a hard time saying my name. Maybe it's because I'm a good Southern man in less than a minute, but we'll see what I can do.
I love it. All right, here we go. First question for you. If you could travel back in time, which period would you travel to?
I mean, wouldn't most people do right after the Great Depression or something like that, so you could get the massive, take advantage of all the trading? Or maybe, you know what, how about the 1980s? Because I'm old enough that I was born that I would remember all the things I could make investments on and make a fortune off of. I'd be the next Warren Buffett.
There you go. Spoken like a true financial planner. Okay, as somebody who just wrote a book, I've got to know, hardback book or Kindle book?
Oh, I think for people you really like their writing style, do hardback book. I mean, I think about all the books. If you come in my office, I have a whole stack of hardback books for just, fiction reading. I think you can all about the Kindle, maybe even the Audible book for the fiction. But if you care about something, get you a hardback so you can look at it and get those warm fuzzies about it every time you look at it in the future.
I love it. Favorite UGA football player?
Oh man, that's tough. Cause I mean, I used to love seeing the old Eric Zier walking around campus when I was in school, but man, I mean, and then you got Herschel. There's so many good choices. And then Hines Ward. Let's go with those three. I like those three. I don't feel like I have to choose just one.
There you go. All right. Good enough. And my final question for you, the internet and the world wants to know, Brian, who was your first celebrity crush?
Oh, my wife, she gets so annoyed because she's going to be like, oh, I can't believe you actually put that out there. Should I say it? I always liked Amy Smart. I don't even know if people are going to even know who Amy Smart is. You have to go Google that now, but it's, she was in, she's even done some stuff. She's done some Christmas movies. She's done all kind of stuff. But my wife, whenever she sees me watching an Amy Smart, she goes, oh, her again.
Amazing. Well, Brian, thank you so much for carving out some time to come on the show. And probably more importantly, thank you for writing a book with such a great mission and for helping, average Joes and Janes out there figure out how to handle their financial order operations for their money so that they can build wealth and that they can change their family's legacy. Thanks so much for doing that. Thanks for carving out time to come on the show.
Oh, Kyle, this was a blast. And by the way, if anybody wants to get a lot more detail, feel free to go out to moneyguy.com/millionaire mission. We actually set up a landing page with even more details on the book and opportunities. So don't miss out on that. And I just hope everybody enjoys it as much as I enjoyed the process of creating this. And I hope it does create some legacy for the next generation. So thanks so much for the opportunity.
Absolutely. All right, everybody, make sure to go pick up a copy on Amazon or wherever you get your books. And then for us, make sure you hit that subscribe button or the follow button wherever you're listening to this. And we will catch you on the next episode. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Kyle.